And with that, let's get into the final part right before the solo. M Shadows has more lyrics here, so this part repeats 4 times instead of the 2 that we observed before. The notes that he's hitting with his voice are following along with the chord tones fairly closely if I remember correctly, and then we get into the transition to the solo. And I'm gonna pull out the solo part right here. I think I notated this solo properly, but sometimes the notes still sound kind of bad anyways. I'm thinking that's due to issues with the MuseScore sound font, though if there are any problems that need to be corrected, just let me know. Now let's go ahead and listen to the transition. Now to start off with, you'll see that I put a note here saying bend to note on lower string. Basically what that means is that along with the note that you see here, you're going to hit the note intervallically right before it on the lower string and bend up to it. And that's something that goes throughout this whole part. There's then a whammy dive here as we get ready to go into the solo proper. There's a lot going on in the solo, so it'd be very difficult to talk about everything that happens, but I'll try to pick out a few points of note as we go through. First of all, we see some utilization of 16th note triplets to add some speed, as well as a little bit of chromaticism right here. And in fact, even beyond chromaticism, I might think of this as the blues scale. So then basically adding in this sharp G right here to give it a bit of a blues sound. Though in the context of a song, it doesn't exactly sound like that. That is technically what that is. That G sharp is also hit here as well. By the way, there will be instances where we see multicolored notes right here if I've selected it. That means that there are different voices. So in the harmony, we'll see both harmony parts on one staff, but just know that they are played by 2 separate guitarists, both Sin and Zaki respectively. Let's go ahead and listen to the first part of the solo. And let's stop right there because there's already a ton to talk about. So while this isn't perfect notation, for these parts right here with the downward facing arrow thing, that shows that they're using a whammy bar to move down from the D to C here respectively before sliding up to the coming notes. It's a really cool effect that you wouldn't get from just playing the notes individually. I just decided to notate it this way because that's technically what the notes are. In listening to the track that I isolated, it seems like they hit a super subtle perfect 4th right here before sliding up. Once again, utilizing some tuplets to give a little bit of speed. Really relying a lot on that blues note with that G sharp. Sorry about the messy vibratos here again. Let me move those out of the way. And with D minor being the chord that they're playing underneath the solo, they're almost outlining that right here. You have some cool notes with staccato on them that also utilize the blues once again in triplet form. So really trying to use articulation to bring out elements in the song to make it interesting beyond just the melodies that they're doing. It's also worth noting that even though the rhythm guitar sounds very similar to the verses, there is this variation that happens right here, and they basically wind up in a different place than they do in the verses altogether on account of it. When I'm playing this song, it definitely doesn't sound right when you play it in the manner of the verse, so I'm gonna guess they were writing this part and they wrote the solo and they realized they needed to change up the rhythm to make it fit the solo better. But that is purely a guess. And though you can't hear it, I did notate here and here that there are lots of slides coming in and out of notes to just add another cool effect. Once again, hanging out in that G sharp again. And even within the melodic lines of the solo, using lots of interesting rhythms like going to 8th notes to 16th notes and then back to an 8th note on the and, just to kind of keep things fresh as well. We then have some aggressive bending right here. And in the actual track, especially listening to it isolated, you can really tell how hard he's riding that guitar string up, and it all adds a certain level of aggression that's a really cool thing to hear in a solo. With that, let's get to what I've labeled as solo 2. So a lot of crazy stuff going on here. So I'm going to take this little part bit by bit. Right here, you could view this as a sort of inversion of D minor, with this being your root note right here on D, and these Fs here, respectively, being your 3rd. This movement is then moved up a 3rd, where we now have the 5ths of D minor right here, and the 3rd of D minor, so still notes falling within the chord of D minor, but just moved up to increase the incitement and variability, all while staying inside the chord very well. We go to what I've labeled as a D diminished implied chord. We have a somewhat similar situation with these G sharps being able to function as the flat 5 of D minor. And though they are the blues note as well, you could also think of all of the G sharps before this part of the song also functioning as the flat 5 of D minor within their context. And as we move on to this part right here, it gets a little bit more odd. Admittedly, these C sharps could function as the major 7 of D minor, and this G would be functioning as the 6 of D minor. Not really an easy way to classify it, but it sounds cool nonetheless. They utilize a slur here as well. Just wanted to point that out. We can get into this super high part right here. So this one is admittedly a little bit odd. We have a G sharp right here, which is not what the chord is implying underneath it. It is merely implying a G with some sequencing around it. And honestly, for this part, I'll probably just leave it there. We then have these A's right here, which again is a little bit strange because underneath it, we have a D flat. We then have a part here, which is also quite strange. We have these A notes going on right here while there is a D flat going on underneath it, which would technically make the interval distance between this D flat right here and these A's right here an augmented fifth. Again, I'll just kind of say that and leave it there. It also ends on an interval that is a major second away from D flat. We then have the crazy chromatic part. Definitely a cool way to just have an insane guitar solo. Aside from the super crazy rhythm that has some variation in it, as can be seen here, I would best classify this as chromatic ascensions and descensions that slowly work their way up. See the chromatic movement here, and then here we observe it back down. Then right here we omit the chromatic movement to be able to move up further. The same kind of thing is repeated here with the chromatic ascension, a chromatic descension, until finally again the chromatic movement is omitted and we ascend higher. It looks like we have a similar chromatic ascension and descension here before finally ascending. We have a sequence at the very top that ends on a C sharp before moving down, before doing a final diatonic ascension upwards and coming to the harmonized arpeggio part. The chromatic lines do start on their chord tones here for the D as well as here for the F, and now that I'm looking at it, at E for the E minor as well. Though this chord change to E minor right here is not accompanied by an E tone right here. That being said, there are 3 places here on the D, E, and F respectively, where the initial notes of the chromatic movements follow along with the chord tones to give things some consistency. And then we finally get into what I have labeled as a transition into solo 3.